Hey guys, welcome to video 3. I'm DJ Phil Harris, this is DJ Mini, and in this video we're going to be running you through the basic functionality of these awesome DJ decks, the DJControl Mix by Hercules. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so at this point we've connected everything, we've loaded some music in. Now I'd like to run through some basic functionality of these DJ decks. But first thing I want to tell you is if you take the phone and you turn it sideways, it'll flip the screen into this kind of size here, so you can see clearly the one deck on the one side and the one deck on the other side. Now at this point this is going to be a great opportunity for us to test to see if our decks are actually connected. So if you put your finger on the wheel here, you should be able to actually control what's happening on the screen. Perfect, it works. So we now know that the two are connected. Now, the first thing I want to tell you is that these DJ decks here just control everything that happens on the screen. That's actually what happens with the majority of DJ controllers out there. They just control a computer program and don't do anything by themselves. So let's now run through some basic functionality. First thing you will have noticed is that these wheels here can control the wheels on the screen by moving it forward or back. Now this has some slightly more advanced features which I'm going to be running through in the beat matching section, but for now let's just run through some other functionality. So we've obviously got the play and pause button. This is relatively obvious what happens. It plays or pauses the song. The next thing I want to draw your attention to is the cue button. This is really interesting. And when you're DJing, you might not always want to bring in the song right from the beginning. You might want to go in a little bit to the song or get a different part of the song you want to bring it in from. In which case, you're going to use a cue button to set the point you want to start the track from. Now at this point, what I'd like you to do is in the middle of this screen, you'll see there's a waveform here. If you click that waveform, it will switch it so you can actually see a waveform on the screen. Now what I'm going to suggest is if you've got a track, you can put your finger on the track and kind of scroll through that track. You can kind of see me scrolling through that track there by touching the waveform. Well, let's say we wanted to go halfway through the song and we wanted to just start the track here. The cue button I can hit and it will set a cue point. You see it just appeared there on the screen. Now when I hit this cue button, it will play from that point, but when I take my finger off the cue button, it will snap back to that point. Which comes in really handy in a moment when we start practicing matching two beats together. The next button here is sync. This has to do with that BPM I first told you about. When tracks are slightly different BPM, for example, one might be 120 and one might be 125, they'll move at slightly different speeds. So when you get them playing at the same time, they'll drift out from each other. So you always want to make sure that the two tracks are the exact same speed. By hitting the sync button, it will snap the two tracks to the same speed. However, I always suggest using these things here to match the speed, which is the tempo sliders. As you can see on the screen, it'll say that the speed of this track is 128 BPM. I can move that down or up with this tempo slider. So if this track here is 128 and this track here is 126, for example, I could match the speeds by bringing this up to 128, like this. Now they're exactly the same speed, which is what you want to do when you're DJing. Now I'm just going to jump into a slightly more advanced thing that you really need to know about here, which is if I look at the screen here, you'll see there's a little musical note just to the left of the tempo slider on the screen. It's important you hit that so it turns blue on both screens. The reason for this is because if it's turned off and I adjust the speed, it will adjust the pitch of the song. In the same way, if I was to slow down my voice gets deeper. And if I speed up my voice, it gets higher. We don't want that happening with the music. If that musical note is not blue, that will happen with the music. Check it out. You see how it changed? It went lower and then higher. So we want to make sure that that's blue. Now when I change it up and down, it will say the same key, which is really, really important. Cool, so that's the speed sorted. The next thing you're going to see is this thing here. It's called the crossfader. It's pretty obvious what this does. If you slide this over to the left, it turns the volume up on this track and the volume down on this track. And as I move it across, it does the opposite. So in doing so, it switches the volume from this side over to this side by moving it back and forth, which we're going to come back to when we do beat matching. The next thing is you obviously have the volumes of both tracks here. So in the same way with this, turning one down and one up is kind of essentially what that crossfader is doing. But I would suggest you just kind of have the volume pretty high on both, okay, to start. The next thing you need to know about is this filter button here. What the filter does is it kind of filters away the higher frequencies of the song. So when you filter down, it almost sounds like you're standing outside of a room or a club that's playing loud music. You can't hear those high frequencies. Let me show you. You can hear those high frequencies have been cut. Now if I do the opposite, it removes the bass frequencies, just leaving those higher pitched sounds. So if you think about it, that's like a volume control, but for the high and low frequencies. You're turning down the high frequencies or you're turning down the low frequencies, is essentially that's what's happening there. Now the next thing you need to know about are these hot cues here. You hit this button, it puts it into hot cue mode. Hot cues are basically the same thing as cue button, except they're permanent. So I can go and set a hot cue here, and I could go and set another hot cue here, and you can see there's now one red and one green. Now, if I hit this one, it goes to red, and if I hit this one, it goes to from green. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between the hot cue and the cue button? Well, the cue button is temporary. If I scan forward and hit the cue button and then hit it, acts like a cue button, but I can move forward a little bit more and set it again, and it moves it. Whereas with the hot cue, it will always snap me back to that point. Even if I take the track off and bring it back on. So this is something that's really relevant for you to know, is that hot cues are permanent and these cue buttons are just temporary. Finally, you also need to know that this here is the master volume control. I always say to have that quite high, and this is the control of the headphones. If you hit either of these buttons, it will activate it so you can hear that deck through your headphones. And those are the basic functionality of these DJ decks. And now you understand that, we can get into slightly more complicated stuff like doing your first DJ mix. Okay guys, hope you enjoyed that video. Make sure you tune into the next video, part 4, where I'm going to be showing you how to do the most important DJ transition ever, which is beat matching on these DJ decks. Super excited, let's jump into that video now.